You've probably asked yourself, why would I need a brothel in my fantasy town? Well, today, we've got the answer, and it's probably not what you think it is. Here at Black Lodge Games, we are always trying to find ways to make things more interesting in our games. And the way that you do that is by anchoring the world in creative conflict and character-driven chaos. We've talked a lot in the past about creating networks of interesting NPCs with conflicting motivations, but today we're going to take a look at how some simple mechanics can help create unexpected excitement in your game and send your players on wild adventures. In our upcoming ShadowDark RPG module, the Shucked Oyster, which launches on Kickstarter on August 6th, we've created a truly wild and exciting new carousing location. This place has everything. It's got crazy characters with harebrained schemes, multiple dungeon adventures tied to it, and a sleek new social mechanic to give high-risk, high-reward results when your players carouse there for that sweet, sweet experience bonus. And all it takes is 2d6 to drive your players crazy. When designing this insane brothel, we wanted the bizarre prostitutes who work there to be an unavoidable tide to carry the players into adventure. The last thing we wanted was for encounters with these fine ladies to end up balanced, because frankly, balance is boring. Luckily, ShadowDark already has a great social mechanic built into it. Reaction checks are usually just used to determine the hostility level of a monster in a dungeon, but taking cues from other games that use this rule, we applied this more broadly in social situations with NPCs. So anytime that your players run into any of these surly whores that work at this beacon of sin, all you need to do is roll 2d6 and consult a small chart and see what kind of madness will ensue. But like we said, we don't want this to be balanced. We want this to be interesting, which is why we came up with the Total Oyster Modifier, or TOM for short. The TOM is a single modifier to all reaction checks with the Ladies of the Oyster that's kept secret from the players. Anything that they do in town will incur bonuses or penalties to this number. What the TOM does is to simulate the catty and mercurial nature of the prostitutes that work at the Shucked Oyster. Both the whores and the patrons your players will encounter like to gossip about what's happening in town, so even seemingly innocuous interactions with characters outside of the brothel will get back to them as your adventurer's reputation grows. This will swing the behavior of these awful trollops to extremes of adoration or loathing. So how does this work in practice? And how do you get your players interested? The easiest way to do this is to place the Shucked Oyster as a point of interest in your existing ShadowDark town. Whether you put this ramshackle and disaster-prone hovel of debauchery in the slums or in the artisan district is up to you and what you think will be most interesting. When your players enter that district, swap out the random encounter table you would usually use for it for the random encounters provided in the Shucked Oyster book. This encounter table doesn't just involve the prostitutes. There are also a dozen fully fleshed out patrons of the oyster that all have their own schemes and machinations around town and in the surrounding countryside, but they're all connected through the single location. For instance, take Ulrich the Despoiler. Now, for reasons we don't want to spoil here, Ulrich is the most hated man in town. Your players aren't going to know this beforehand, but any time that they help Ulrich in any way, or just show him basic human decency, this is going to get back to the ladies at the Shucked Oyster and incur a -2 penalty to the TOM every time they do it. So when your players are walking down the street and you roll an 85 on the random encounter table, Ulrich is going to be physically thrown through the window of a first-floor building. If they help him get up or clear the broken glass off of his bleeding body, that's -2 to the TOM. So when the players go to carouse at the Shucked Oyster, this is going to do two things. Number one, you're going to roll your reaction check to see how the Ladies of the Oyster greet your players. If you rolled an 8, this would put their reaction in the suspicious category. But since your players actually had a heart and helped Ulrich the Despoiler off the ground, this 8 becomes a 6 with that -2 penalty. The ladies are now considered hostile.
Whoa! Hey, what the hell are you doing?
And are going to peddle their wares in the most aggressive and off-putting ways possible. Number 2, when your players do open their purse strings and put down their cash to carouse for extra experience, you're going to add the TOM to their carousing outcome roll as well. You see, The Shucked Oyster has its own set of carousing events and outcomes. Your players get to choose what they want off the oyster's menu, just like they'd be able to choose what kind of bender they're going on with the standard rules. Suppose, for instance, they paid 300 gold pieces for Bronwyn's coal mine collapse. This would usually give them a +2 bonus on their carousing roll, but since they have a penalty from the Tom, they don't get a bonus at all. In this case, your players rolled a natural 7. Pretty good. But instead of gaining 5 XP and getting a lead about the local Thieves Guild, your players only gained 4 XP and learned a secret about one of the patrons of the oyster. And that's only from one interaction with the Tom. There are over 30 different actions your players can take that change the total oyster modifier, and there is no limit to how far it can stack in either the positive or negative direction. But fortunes change quickly at the Shucked Oyster. The ladies are fickle. Maybe it was the booze or the drugs, or maybe it was the fact that instead of picking a fight with the very obviously a vampire guy standing in the corner of the brothel, you told him to, come over and have a drink and carouse with us too. Whatever it was that you did when you blacked out on this wild night of debauchery, it was enough to change how the women in this house of sin see you. Every time that you carouse at the Shucked Oyster, you invert the total oyster modifier. If you had a -4, after that party, it's a +4. The next time you see these painted strumpets, they don't hate you, they love you.
Shut up, baby dick.
All right, well, I'm out of here.
No.
And your players won't have any idea why. This adds a lot of interest and intrigue, but it also prevents your players from getting in a rut where the horrors become predictable, or even worse, boring. And this just scratches the surface of what's in this module. This simple mechanic is not only going to produce a lot of weird and entertaining interactions on its own, but it's going to draw your players into the surreal and bizarre adventures surrounding the Shucked Oyster, and get them involved in a truly weird and dangerous mystery. Every single one of these prostitutes has a personality, and even if your players are nothing but the worst kind of murder hobos, that isn't going to stop the madness of the Shucked Oyster. Not everyone who dies in this brothel is content to remain underground. But that's a topic for another video. Don't miss the launch of the Kickstarter for the Shucked Oyster on August 6th. It's gonna blow your mind.